All right. I think we're live. I don't know if the sound is working properly. I might have to take out the headphones. We'll see. This is the first live stream I've done in a while, at least from. Okay, so we have one person watching. Just wait to see if anyone drops in. I wanted to talk about the truck convoy happening in Canada. It was kind of funny. I saw a clip the other day of a bunch of masked women who look to be in their mid 50s to early 60s, and they sort of resemble the stereotypical Rachel Maddow audience when you picture it's but it reminded me of a kids in the hall sketch. They were complaining about the fact that these truckers were honking and that the trucks were long and they were loud, and their response to it was to give them the thumbs down. They actually showed the woman. You could probably do a search for this. They showed one of the women just demonstratively sticking her thumb down as a rejection of the anti-mandate convoy that's taken up uh, that's roosting in the middle of Ottawa, which is the capital of it's the political capital of Canada. And what it, I mean, there are a couple of things. The fact that they're already drawing back. The provincial governments are relaxing the COVID restrictions. They're promising to do away with mandates. The Quebec, I think, they had a premier who wanted to basically fine and confiscate the wealth of people who hadn't gotten the jab. And Quebec, I think Manitoba and Saskatchewan. Hey, Alejandro, a couple of other provincial governments have already been forced to back down because of this, which makes you wonder what would have happened if there had been this determination 2 years earlier. And this is one of the arguments I always make: the fact that there were people willing to concede almost immediately at the beginning of this epidemic. Hi, double E. Uh, the fact that there are people with a willingness to concede, I think that's where the battle was lost, because they were essentially conceding the notion that the government had their best interests at heart, which is insane when you look at the history of governments worldwide and even the history of our government. You don't even have to go back to the progressive era. You don't have to go back to World War II. Even within the past half decade, they've illustrated how little they care for human life. And you don't even necessarily have to look at the 60 million abortions that have been that have taken place since the enactment of Roe v. Wade. You don't have to look at the fact that euthanasia policies are being implemented across the country. Even in New York State, you see ads. Basically, they're pro-assisted suicide ads, got under the veneer of death with dignity or compassionate choices. I forget the expression they use, but something along those lines. And you don't even have to look at the overt demonstration of contempt for human life. Just look at how they've treated humans during the pandemic. 5 governors transferred COVID infected patients into nursing homes. They premeditatedly murdered thousands, tens of thousands, and we don't even have an accurate statistical assessment of how many lives were lost. We have guesses. Yeah, well, I think the idea is you shouldn't assume that, and that was the problem here. The this demented notion that the government has the interests of the public at heart. They're not, and this goes a little into public choice theory. This idea that politicians don't have personal interests, that they're acting on behalf of the people they ostensibly represent is simply it's demonstrably false. There's no evidence to support that assertion, and yet people look at this, and this explains a lot of the support you have for programs that have consistently failed to deliver on any of their promises. This idea that the government is acting on your behalf is simply false, and that politicians, that there are no vested interest there. I mean, they had to be they had to be bullied into enacting a law against insider trading and against profiting off of their knowledge. I mean, you look at the stock portfolios of the average member of Congress, let alone people like Nancy Pelosi or Barbara Boxer. you you look at these people, they're wealthier than some CEOs. It's absurd. Have a margarita. Yeah, but they have no concern for human life at all, and that was demonstrated during the epidemic. So the idea that we should continue to listen to them, someone like Anthony Fauci, who's a complete sociopath, you even during the documentary, the hagiographical film they made about Anthony Fauci, I think it was HBO. I'm not sure if it's HBO or Netflix, but one of these companies released this pay-on to Dr. Fauci, and there's a scene where he has three self-portraits in his home office, so he can gaze at himself throughout the day. It's just insane to conceive of these people as having any altruistic motive. It's really a bizarre way of looking at things. But the can but I think that's one of the reasons why the mistake was not doing this at the outset of the pandemic, which was used as a justification to enact all of these regressive totalitarian policies. I mean, one of the great things about this is the awareness of a vital. This is another thing. People who are in a position to bring society to a standstill, and truckers. No one is better suited to that than truckers. They are the lifeline for the entire nation. The they can stop the distribution of food. They can bring an economy to a halt. So they are in the perfect position to bend the Canadian government to their will. They've already ousted. This has already resulted in the ouster of Erin O'Toole, the leader of the Conservative Party in Canada, who was complicit in all of these uh, restrictions, and basically did nothing to resist them at all. Yeah, that's one of the reasons people are not more outraged by this. They're focused on survival. But I mean, that's one of the things that I think is great about this, the awareness. And even if they don't get Trudeau, the fact that he's in hiding is is kind of hilarious. But even if they're not completely successful in achieving their goals, the idea that they're occupying the they're essentially occupying enemy territory. They've taken over a city that is responsible for the nationwide restrictions related to this illness. which is why I find it so ironic that these people are complaining about having their lives disrupted. They're demanding all of the all of the tin horn totalitarians in Ottawa. These people are just screaming for the police and the army to to dislodge the truckers, to arrest them, to stop this. They're just bleeding incessantly for the past week, saying that their lives have been disrupted. They've not been able to go. They've not been able to go to their appointments. The honking is keeping them awake. And I don't even think they're cognizant of the irony here. The fact that they're responsible for the lives of millions of Canadians being disrupted. They're responsible for, depending on what part of Canada you live in, they're responsible for unvaccinated people who aren't willing to comply with this edict, not being able to go to restaurants or gyms and recreational centers, and yet they don't. It's an illustration, really, of the lack of empathy. The people who, and this is a universal truth, the people who harp on their empathy, the fact that they're empathetic, hawking bad, looting good. I mean, that's another issue altogether. But the people who highlight their empathy the most are usually have no empathy for anyone with a different perspective, anyone who doesn't conform to their ideological premises. It's astounding, really. Hey GW. Hey, hey, wow, my friend from Chicago is here. Um, yeah, lives have been disrupted for the past 2 years. Hey, Godward. Hi, Seth. Uh, they started had to say because COVID we can't comply. This is this is another really hilarious anecdote. The city, if you go to Twitter, there's an entire thread of people lamenting the fact that they weren't able to go out and protest the truck. I don't know exactly what they intended on doing, but they were seeking to stage a counter protest to all of these truckers, and they were banned from doing so because of the Ottawa Mayor. And there were all of these liberals and blue checks expressing outrage that they're not able to assemble freely. And again, I don't think they understand the irony of this. The rules that they imposed themselves and that they demanded be enacted are being used to thwart the exercise of their rights. They're not allowed to do something that they want to do because of their own stupidity and short-sightedness. It really is astounding. It really is. Yeah, the economy's ruined. The debt has imploded. Trudeau, I I I don't know the exact figures, but Trudeau has squandered the 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 fiscal restraint that was exercised by Stephen Harper and his predecessors, going all the way back to the early 90s, when the Canadian government actually began to claw back the national debt. and he's destroyed that. And another interesting aspect of this is the fact that Trudeau is a minority government. The Liberal Party is a minority government. He was elected by, I believe, 32% or 33%. Correct me if I'm wrong, of the public. So the Liberal Party represents at most a third. Now there are other left-wing parties like the NDP and the Greens, which has a significantly smaller percentage, and I think they have two or three parliamentarians. They have a couple of ridings, but basically, so there's a larger left-wing, uh, left-wing group in the Canadian Parliament, but it's essentially a third of the Canadian populace wants this man to be prime minister, which makes sense when you look at what a cretin he is. I mean, this is a guy. This is a guy who has worn blackface so many times he can't even recall the number, and yet he sends out tweets celebrating Black History Month. Yeah, he barely won, and I mean that's one of the reasons that Aaron O'Toole is no longer leader. Um, he barely won the last election, and he represents a minority of people, and yet you have these these folks in Ottawa and the press there describing this as if they're being besieged by a small or a fringe minority. Even Trudeau's words were a fringe minority. He is really a fringe minority. I mean, when you look at the percentage of people that oppose vaccine mandates, that is a majority of people. It's not. It's not a majority of people who support his government. Yeah, Trudeau is an imbecile. There's no there's no there's no two ways about it. I don't think there's any way, even, which is why it's so astounding that you see people defending him out of tribal loyalty. I can't imagine, as terrible as Biden is, he's, and you've seen over the weekend at Bernie's memes. Somehow he's still less embarrassing than the Canadian Prime Minister. But that's another aspect that's amazing. The idea that someone who represents a small minority, about a third of the population, is able to castigate people who are representing the majority of the Canadian populace. And yeah, I think that's a big white pill. The fact that this group has been able to occupy and disrupt the lives of people who are responsible for the disastrous state of affairs. I mean, not only in Canada but across the globe. Queens. uh hey Dragon. Hi, David. The whole thing is actually sort of encouraging when you look at it from that perspective. The idea the idea that this has completely disrupted the agenda, at least for the time being. It's disrupted it's disrupted their agenda, and the fact that it might be replicated in other countries. It might be replicated in Australia or the United States. There have been rumors, it's been bantered about, that truckers might do this in Washington D.C. I'm not sure if that's going to happen, but the idea that this is being discussed openly is encouraging. So those are just a few of my thoughts. I just want to do a short live stream. Thanks everyone for coming. Dee Dee, uh, Seth, my friend, my old friend from Chicago. Uh, yeah, it's definitely a motto that people can adopt in the future. And like I said, I think this is something that should have been embraced from the very beginning. It took months for anyone to protest these these restrictions. It took months, and even then it was sporadic. But anyway, I just thought I'd jump on for a couple of minutes, and I will see you all next time.